The red dust of Kampala clung to Pastor Minjun's black shoes as he stepped off the bus, his collar damp with sweat despite the early morning hour. He had been in Uganda for 3 weeks, and the humidity still caught him by surprise each day, wrapping around him like a warm, insistent embrace. His church in Seoul had sent him here with a clear mission: establish connections with local congregations, train youth leaders, and return home within 6 months. Simple. Structured. Safe. He hadn't expected Amara. She appeared on his 4th Sunday at the small church in Nakawa, slipping into the back row just as he began his sermon. Minjun noticed her immediately, though he tried not to let his gaze linger. She wore a yellow dress that seemed to capture the sunlight streaming through the church's open windows, and when she smiled at something he said about grace, he lost his train of thought completely. The congregation waited patiently as he fumbled for his notes, their faces kind and understanding in a way that made him feel both welcomed and exposed. After the service, she didn't approach him. She simply shook hands with the elderly women near the door and disappeared into the crowded street outside. Minjun found himself scanning the congregation for her the following week, then felt guilty for his distraction. He was here to serve God, not to notice beautiful women. His parents back in Seoul had already begun introducing him to suitable matches, daughters of deacons and elders who understood the demands of ministry life. His mother sent him photos attached to long emails about family backgrounds and education credentials. But Amara returned the next Sunday, and this time she stayed for tea. The church served chai and mandatsi in the small courtyard after services, and Minjun stood awkwardly holding his cup as Pastor Moses introduced them properly. Her name meant grace in Swahili, Moses explained, and she volunteered at a medical clinic nearby. Her handshake was firm, her English flawless, with a melodic accent that made even simple words sound like music. "You spoke about fear today," she said, her dark eyes meeting his directly. "About how it keeps us from God's calling." That was brave. Minjun felt heat rise to his face. "I was speaking to myself as much as anyone. The best sermons usually are." She smiled then, and he noticed the small gap between her front teeth, the way her whole face seemed to light up from within. "Are you afraid to be here, Pastor Minjun?" "In Uganda?" The question caught him off guard with its directness. In Korea, such personal inquiries would come much later, wrapped in layers of polite deflection. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Everything is so different. The food, the language, the way people worship. Even the silences feel foreign. And yet you came anyway." She tilted her head slightly. "That's either very faithful or very foolish. Perhaps both." She laughed at that, a sound that reminded him of the bells that hung in his grandmother's garden back home. Around them, the congregation moved in familiar patterns, children chasing each other between the adults, old men arguing good-naturedly about football. No one seemed to notice that Minjun and Amara had been talking for nearly 20 minutes, or if they did, they chose not to interfere. The weeks that followed established a rhythm Minjun hadn't planned for. Amara began arriving early to services, helping arrange the plastic chairs and distribute the worn hymnals. She would ask him questions about Korea, about his family, about the theology he'd studied in seminary. In return, he learned that she had lost her mother to malaria when she was 12, that she dreamed of becoming a doctor but couldn't afford medical school, that she sang in 3 different church choirs because music was her way of praying. They began taking walks after evening services, when the heat had broken and the city settled into its twilight rhythms. Minjun told himself it was cultural exchange, ministry networking, building bridges between their communities. But he knew he was lying. He knew it when he found himself choosing his clothes more carefully on the days he would see her, when he saved interesting observations throughout the week to share with her, when his prayers began to include her name with alarming frequency. The first time he held her hand was accidental. They were crossing a busy street near the market, and he reached out instinctively as a matatu swerved too close. But he didn't let go on the other side, and she didn't pull away. They walked 3 more blocks in silence, her palm warm and dry against his, the touch speaking all the things they hadn't yet said aloud. It was Pastor Moses who first voiced concern. He invited Minjun for dinner one evening, and after his wife had cleared the plates, The old man leaned back in his chair and studied his guest with eyes that had seen decades of human nature. "You care for Amara," he said simply. Not a question. Minjun considered lying, then abandoned the attempt. "Yes. Does your church in Seoul know?" "There's nothing to know yet. We're just friends." Pastor Moses made a sound that might have been a chuckle or a sigh. "I have never seen friendship look quite like that, my young brother. I have seen you watch her when she sings. I have seen her face when you enter a room." Minjun's throat tightened. "I'm not sure what to do. You must decide what matters more, the approval of men or the leading of your heart. Both are important, but they are not always the same." The older man paused, choosing his words carefully. "In Uganda, we have learned to welcome love where we find it. But I know Korea has different traditions. Your family, your church, they may not understand." "They won't," Minjun said quietly. "They'll think I've lost my mind. Thrown away my future. And have you?" The question hung in the humid air between them. Through the window, Minjun could see Kampala's lights beginning to twinkle across the hills. Somewhere out there, Amara was probably at the clinic, caring for patients who couldn't pay, singing softly as she worked. The thought of leaving her, of returning to Seoul and marrying some appropriate stranger, felt like slowly suffocating. "I think I might be falling in love with her," he whispered. Pastor Moses nodded slowly. "Then you must pray. And you must be honest with her about what this will cost. Love is beautiful, but it is not always easy. Especially love that crosses the lines people have drawn." That night, Minjun couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress in his rented room, listening to the sounds of the city, the dogs barking and distant music and the rumble of occasional thunder. He thought about his parents, about the shame his choices might bring to his family. In Korean culture, such dishonor rippled outward, affecting not just him but his entire lineage. His father was a respected elder in their church, his mother the leader of the women's ministry. They had sacrificed everything for his education, his calling. How could he repay them with scandal? But when he closed his eyes, he saw Amara's face. He heard her laughter. He remembered the way she had prayed over a sick child at the clinic, her voice fierce with faith and tenderness. He thought about how she made him feel both more Korean and less Korean at once, more aware of his culture's beauty and its limitations, more connected to something larger than national identity or family expectation. The next evening, he found her at the clinic, just as the last patient was leaving. She looked tired, her yellow dress wrinkled from the long day, but her smile was instant when she saw him in the doorway. "Pastor Minjun, I didn't expect you. Can we talk?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Somewhere private?" Concern flickered across her face, but she nodded. They walked to a small park nearby, really just a patch of grass with 2 benches beneath a jacaranda tree. The purple blossoms had begun to fall, carpeting the ground in soft color. They sat, and Minjun realized his hands were shaking. "Amara, I need to tell you something. But I'm afraid of what it might mean." She turned to face him fully, her expression serious now. "Then tell me anyway. Fear is a poor compass." He took a breath and spoke the truth that had been building in his chest for weeks. "I think about you constantly. When I wake up, when I pray, when I'm supposed to be focused on ministry. You've become the lens through which I see everything here. And I know this is wrong, or at least complicated, because I'm supposed to return to Korea, supposed to marry someone my family chooses, supposed to follow the path that's been laid out for me since I was a child." Amara's eyes had grown bright with unshed tears. "And what do you want, Minjun? Not what you're supposed to want. What does your heart tell you?" "That I want to stay," he said, his voice breaking. "That I want to know what it means to build a life with you. But I'm terrified of what that will cost. My family might disown me. My church will certainly withdraw support. I could lose everything I've worked for." She was quiet for a long moment, and Minjun felt panic rising. Had he said too much? Moved too fast? Misread everything between them? Then Amara reached out and took both his hands in hers. "I have been praying about this too," she said softly. "Because I see the way you look at me, and I feel the same pull. But I won't be the reason you lose your family, Minjun. I won't be the cause of your regret." "You wouldn't be," he said urgently. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. You wouldn't be the loss. You would be what I choose. Today, perhaps. But what about in 5 years? 10? When the newness wears off and you're far from home, cut off from everything familiar. Will you still feel that way when your children ask why their Korean grandparents won't speak to them? The specificity of her words struck him. She had been thinking about this deeply, considering not just the romance, but the reality. It made him love her more. I can't promise there won't be hard days, Minjun said. But I can promise that choosing you would never be my regret. You've woken something in me, Amara. A courage I didn't know I had. A faith that looks beyond what I was taught to believe was possible. She smiled then, tears finally spilling over. You've done the same for me. Made me believe I could be loved not despite who I am, but because of it. Do you know how rare that is? They sat in silence as the sun set over Kampala, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Around them, the city shifted into its evening mode, street vendors calling out their wares, children being summoned home for dinner, the muezzin's call to prayer drifting from a nearby mosque. It was a moment suspended between decision and consequence, between the life Minjun had planned and the one spreading out before him like uncharted territory. What do we do? Amara finally asked. We take it one step at a time, Minjun said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. I'll write to my parents. Tell them the truth. And then we'll see what happens. But writing the letter proved harder than speaking the words had been. Minjun sat in his room for 3 nights, starting and abandoning draft after draft. How did you tell your parents, across thousands of miles and cultural chasms, that you were choosing a path they would never understand? How did you explain that love had ambushed you in a place you were only supposed to be passing through? In the end, he wrote simply and honestly. He told them about Amara, about her faith and kindness and strength. He told them he had prayed and sought counsel and felt God's peace about this decision. He didn't apologize for falling in love, but he expressed sorrow for any pain his choice might cause. He asked for their blessing, even as he acknowledged he might never receive it. The response came 3 weeks later, and it was worse than he'd feared. His mother's email was brief and cold, written in formal Korean that felt like a door slamming. They did not approve. They could not support this choice. If he proceeded, he would be bringing shame upon the family. His father, she wrote, was so distraught he could not bring himself to respond at all. The church leadership's letter arrived 2 days later. They were recalling him immediately. His mission was terminated. They would arrange his flight home within the week. There was no discussion of his calling or his work in Uganda, no acknowledgement of the ministry he had built. Just a clear expectation, return, repent, and perhaps in time they would consider his future in ministry. Minjun showed both letters to Amara in the same park where they'd first confessed their feelings. She read them slowly, her face growing more troubled with each line. When she finished, she handed them back and turned away, her shoulders tense. This is what I was afraid of, she said. You're losing everything because of me. I'm not losing everything. I'm choosing something different. But even as he said it, Minjun felt the weight of what he was giving up. His identity as a pastor had been his anchor since he was 19 years old. His family's approval had shaped every major decision he'd made. Now both were being stripped away, and he felt unmoored, adrift. You should go back, Amara said quietly. Talk to them in person. Maybe if they see how serious you are, if you have time to explain properly. They've made their position clear. But you haven't made yours. She turned to face him, her eyes fierce with unshed tears. You need to go back and tell them to their faces that you're choosing this. Choosing me. Not in a letter, not across distance, but standing in front of them, claiming your own life. Otherwise, you'll always wonder if you gave up too easily. Minjun started to protest, then realized she was right. He had been avoiding the confrontation, taking the coward's way. If he truly believed this was right, he needed to own it completely, face the full weight of his family's disappointment and his church's rejection. Will you wait for me? He asked. I'll wait, she promised. But Minjun, you have to be absolutely sure. Once you burn these bridges, there may be no rebuilding them. I need you to understand that. The flight back to Seoul felt interminable. Minjun rehearsed what he would say to his parents 1,000 times, each version sounding more inadequate than the last. When he finally stood in their small apartment in Gangnam, facing their closed, hurt expressions, all his prepared words evaporated. His father spoke first, his voice heavy with betrayal. "You were our pride, Minjun. The first in our family to attend seminary, to be ordained. And you throw it away for what? A woman you barely know? In a country you'll never understand." "I'm not throwing anything away, Appa. I'm following what I believe God has called me to." His mother made a sharp sound of disbelief. "Don't hide behind God's name for your selfishness. You want what you want, and you're willing to destroy this family to get it." The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. He did want Amara, wanted her with an intensity that sometimes frightened him. But it wasn't only desire driving him. It was something deeper, something that felt like finally becoming fully himself. "Yama, Appa, I know this isn't what you planned for me. I know it brings you shame, and I'm sorry for that. But I can't live a lie. I can't marry someone I don't love and pretend to be happy. I can't serve in a church that demands I deny my own heart." "Your heart," his father spat. "What about duty? What about honor? What about the sacrifices we made for you?" "I'm grateful for those sacrifices. Every day of my life, I'm grateful. But I can't repay them by being miserable. That doesn't honor you. It just means we're all unhappy." They argued in circles for hours, his parents pleading and threatening by turns, Minjun standing firm even as his resolve wavered under their pain. His mother wept openly, something he'd rarely seen. His father's disappointment was a palpable force in the room, making it hard to breathe. Finally, exhausted, his father delivered the ultimatum Minjun had been dreading. "If you return to Uganda, if you marry this woman, you are no longer our son. We will tell people you died on the mission field. Do you understand? You will be dead to us." The words landed like physical blows. Minjun had known his parents would be upset, but this absolute rejection still shocked him. In his darkest imaginings, he'd hoped for eventual reconciliation, for time to heal the breach. But his father's eyes were cold and final. "I understand," Minjun said quietly. "And I'm sorry." He left their apartment with only the clothes on his back, sleeping that night in a church hostel where no one knew him. He spent the next 3 days in a fog of grief, questioning everything. Was he being brave or simply selfish? Was this faith or foolishness? He visited his old seminary, walked the streets of his neighborhood, trying to find some sign that he was making the right choice. It came in an unexpected form. He ran into Professor Choi, his ethics teacher from seminary, at a cafe near the campus. The old man invited him to sit, and Minjun found himself pouring out the whole story. Professor Choi listened without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful. When Minjun finished, the professor was quiet for a long moment, stirring his tea methodically. "I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone," he finally said. "When I was young, before seminary, I fell in love with a Japanese woman. This was back when Korea still carried deep wounds from the occupation, when such a match was almost unthinkable. My family forbade it. My friends called me a traitor. And I listened to them. I let her go and married someone appropriate." He paused, pain flickering across his face. "My wife was a good woman. We had a decent life. But not a day has passed in 40 years that I haven't wondered what I gave up. Whether my obedience was really righteousness or just cowardice dressed up in cultural clothing." Minjun felt tears pricking his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the hardest moral choices aren't between good and evil, but between competing goods. Your parents' desire for cultural continuity is not evil. But neither is your desire for authentic love. Someone will be hurt either way. The question is, whose life are you living? Whose calling are you following?" The professor's words settled something in Minjun's chest. He called Amara that night, his first communication since returning to Korea. "I'm coming back," he told her. "If you'll still have me." Her laugh was watery with relief. "I'll still have you, you stubborn man." "But Minjun, are you at peace with this?" "Really?" "I am," he said, and realized it was true. "I'm sad. I'm grieving. But I'm at peace." Returning to Uganda felt like breathing after being underwater. When Minjun emerged from the airport, Amara was there, wearing the same yellow dress from that first Sunday. They didn't run to each other like in movies, but walked slowly, deliberately, closing the distance with intention. "Hello," she said, suddenly shy. "Hello," he replied, and then he was holding her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her arms strong around his back, and he knew with absolute certainty that he had chosen correctly. They were married 3 months later in Pastor Moses's church, surrounded by the Ugandan congregation that had become Minjun's new family. His parents did not attend, did not acknowledge the wedding at all. The absence ached like a missing tooth, ever present but something he learned to work around. Minjun found work teaching English at a local school while continuing to preach at smaller churches in the area. The lifestyle was modest compared to what he might have had in Seoul, but it felt authentic in a way his old life never had. Amara enrolled in nursing school, her tuition paid by a medical scholarship Minjun had helped her apply for. Their first year of marriage was harder than either had anticipated. Cultural differences they'd minimized during courtship became sources of friction. Minjun's Korean need for order clashed with Amara's more relaxed Ugandan approach to time and planning. His indirect communication style frustrated her directness. Her emotional expressiveness sometimes overwhelmed his trained reserve. But they learned. They fought and forgave and fought again, slowly building a shared language that honored both their backgrounds. Minjun taught Amara to make kimchi, and she taught him to dance to Ugandan gospel music. They celebrated both Chuseok and Ugandan Independence Day, attended both Presbyterian and Pentecostal services, raised their voices in both Korean hymns and African choruses. The loneliness crept up on Minjun in unexpected moments. Watching other men video call their parents, hearing Korean music in a shop and feeling tears well up, wanting desperately to share good news with his family and having nowhere to send it. Amara would hold him during these moments, not trying to fix it, just being present in his grief. News came 2 years into their marriage that Minjun's father had suffered a stroke. His mother sent a brief message through a distant cousin. He was in the hospital, not expected to recover fully. There was no invitation to visit, no softening of the estrangement, just information delivered like a weather report. Minjun agonized over whether to go back, but Amara pushed him. "He's your father. You need to try." So Minjun returned to Seoul once more, arriving at the hospital with his heart in his throat. His mother was in the room when he entered, and her face went through a series of emotions so quickly he couldn't track them all: shock, anger, pain, and something that might have been longing before she shuddered it away. "You shouldn't be here," she said in Korean. "He's my father. You gave up that right." Minjun moved past her to the bed where his father lay, smaller and more fragile than he remembered. The old man's eyes opened, focused on his son's face, and widened in recognition. His mouth moved, trying to form words the stroke had stolen. Minjun took his father's hand, feeling how thin it had become. "Appa, I'm here. I know you don't approve of my choices. I know I've brought you shame. But I need you to know I'm happy. I'm doing work that matters. I'm loved and I love in return. I'm still your son, even if you can't acknowledge it." His father's eyes filled with tears that tracked down his temples. His grip tightened on Minjun's hand, and in that pressure, Minjun felt something shift. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but not total rejection either. A crack in the wall, small but significant. His mother's voice came from behind him, thick with emotion. "You look thin. Are you eating properly?" It was such a Korean mother thing to say, so familiar and so loaded with everything they couldn't speak aloud, that Minjun almost laughed. "Amara is teaching me to cook. I eat very well." The name hung in the air between them. His mother didn't flinch away from it this time, didn't pretend she hadn't heard. "Is she good to you?" "She's the best person I know, Yama. She's patient with my stubbornness. She challenges me to be better. She loves God and serves others tirelessly. You would like her if you gave yourself the chance." His mother sat down heavily in the chair by the window. "I don't know how to do this. How to accept something so far from what I imagined for you." "You don't have to accept it all at once," Minjun said gently. "Just don't completely close the door. That's all I'm asking." He stayed in Seoul for a week, visiting his father daily. Slowly, painfully, his mother began to thaw. She asked questions about his life in Uganda, his work, his church. She never asked about Amara directly, but she listened when he talked about her, and she didn't change the subject. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was something. On his last day, his mother gave him a small package. "Photographs," she said. "From when you were young. I thought you might want them. For your children someday." The acknowledgement of future grandchildren nearly undid him. "Thank you, Yama. I'm still angry with you," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "But I'm trying not to be. That will have to be enough for now." It's more than enough. Flying back to Uganda this time felt different. Minjun carried his mother's gift and a fragile hope that perhaps, given enough time, his family might find their way back to him. It wouldn't be the relationship they'd had before, but it might become something new, something more honest. Amara was waiting at the airport again, and this time Minjun did run to her. He swept her up, spinning them both around, laughing at her surprised shriek. "Your mother," she asked when he set her down. "She gave me photographs. Asked about our future children." Amara's eyes went wide. "Minjun, that's huge." "I know. It's not a blessing, not yet. But it's not a curse anymore either." They drove home through Kampala's chaotic traffic, Amara's hand in his, and Minjun felt the last piece of tension release from his chest. He had chosen this life, and yes, it had cost him dearly. But looking at his wife's profile as she hummed along to the radio, seeing the home they'd built together coming into view, feeling the rightness of this place and this calling, he knew he would choose it again. Every single time, he would choose it again. Years would pass, marked by small victories and ongoing challenges. Minjun's father would recover enough to video call occasionally, their conversations stilted but genuine. His mother would eventually visit Uganda, meeting Amara with cautious warmth that would slowly deepen into respect and then affection. The church in Seoul would never take him back, but other churches would welcome his unique perspective, his bridge building between cultures. They would have 2 children, a daughter named Grace and a son named Samuel, who would grow up code-switching between Korean, English, and Luganda, who would feel equally at home with kimchi and matoki, who would carry both cultures in their bones and be richer for it. Minjun would watch them and marvel at how his one forbidden choice had created these extraordinary lives, these bridges between worlds. But all of that was still to come. On this evening, driving through Kampala with his wife beside him, Pastor Minjun simply smiled and said a prayer of thanksgiving. For courage, for love, for the grace that had carried him through the forbidden into the free.